There are moments in life that are a fork in the road. Then there are moments that are a multi-lane highway interchange, complete with confusing signage, a guy in a pickup truck tailgating you, and the sinking feeling that you're about to end up in a state you never intended to visit. For me, that moment arrived on a sunny Saturday morning, disguised as a dispute over the color red. I was in my garage, the one sanctuary of controlled chaos in a neighborhood drowning in beige. The smell of gun oil and old electronics hung in the air, a potpourri of my two great loves, volunteering for county search and rescue and my amateur radio hobby. I was meticulously cleaning the mud from my SAR pack after a recent training exercise, feeling that quiet satisfaction that comes from maintaining life-saving equipment. That's when the shadow fell across the driveway. I didn't even have to look. You can feel a presence like that. A disturbance in the force. If the force was a 50-something HOA president with a visor pulled down so tight it was probably leaving tan lines on her ego. "Mark," she said. Her voice was a carefully curated blend of forced friendliness and the tone a kindergarten teacher uses right before she takes away your crayons. I straightened up slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. "Brenda, to what do I owe the pleasure? Running low on violations to issue this month?" She gave a tight, reptilian smile. "Always a comedian. I just wanted to have a friendly word." She held up a clipboard, the source of all misery in Crestwood Meadows. "It's about your mailbox." I squinted. My mailbox was a standard black metal box on a wooden post. It had been there since my parents bought the house 30 years ago. "What about it? Did a bird poop on it in a non-regulation pattern?" "The flag," she said, tapping a manicured nail on the paper. "The red is, well, it's not the board-approved shade of crimson. It's more of a fire engine red. It's far too vibrant." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It never came. She was dead serious. The little red flag I flipped up to signal I had outgoing mail was an affront to the carefully cultivated monotony of her suburban fiefdom. My internal monologue, a sarcastic and perpetually tired narrator, kicked into high gear. There she was, Brenda Miller, Queen of Crestwood Meadows, surveying her kingdom. She wasn't just looking at my house, she was auditing it, searching for any aesthetic deviation, any spark of individuality to be fined into oblivion. Her visor was probably giving her a tactical advantage against rogue sunbeams and unapproved garden gnomes. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It's a mailbox flag. It's the color it came from the factory. I can't exactly repaint it. That would be mail tampering." "Well, the CC rupees are very clear on exterior color palettes," she sniffed, handing me the slip of paper. It was an official notice. A $25 fine for unapproved chromatic display. I took it from her, my knuckles white. This was the game she played. Tiny, insignificant power plays designed to grind you down until you either submitted to the beige conformity or moved out. Most people just paid the fine. I wasn't most people. As she turned to leave, she paused, her eyes drifting upwards to the roof. "And while I'm here," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, "that thing." She was pointing at my Diamond X50A. It's a modest vertical antenna, about 5 feet tall, for my 2-meter and 70-centimeter radio bands. To a normal person, it looks like a simple white fiberglass pole. To me, it was a vital link to the county's emergency communications network. To Brenda, it was a metal weed spoiling her view. "It really detracts from the neighborhood skyline," she finished. That was the line, the one that snapped something deep inside me. "First of all, Brenda, it's an amateur radio antenna. Second, the only skyline we have here is the top of your minivan. Third, and most importantly, federal law specifically, the FCC's PRB1 Act preempts any local ordinance or HOA restriction that would prevent me from having an effective antenna for amateur communications. It's protected, unequivocally." Her smile vanished completely. The friendly neighborhood watchdog was gone, replaced by the cold, hard tyrant underneath. "The board will be reviewing the bylaws," she said, her voice a low threat. "We'll see how protected it is." She spun on her sensible walking shoes and marched back across the street to her own perfectly manicured, perfectly beige house, leaving me standing in my driveway holding a piece of paper that fined me for the color red. The highway interchange was in front of me, and Brenda had just forced me onto the exit ramp labeled Scorched Earth. I crumpled the violation notice into a tight ball and threw it into the trash. $25 wasn't the point, it was the principle. It was the slow, creeping tyranny of a woman whose only joy in life seemed to be sanding the edges off everyone else's. Later that afternoon, I was in my home office, my Radio Shack, my nerd nirvana. Racks of gear hummed quietly, their little green and amber lights blinking in a soothing rhythm. On one of my monitors, I had a video call open with my best friend Dave. "Let me guess," he said, his face appearing on the screen, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. "The Queen of Beige paid you a visit." "She's escalated, dude," I said, leaning back in my chair. "We're past trash cans and wind chimes. She's eyeing the rig. She called the Diamond X50 a Skyline detractor." Dave choked on his sandwich, laughing. "A Skyline detractor? What Skyline is she even talking about? The power lines?" "That's what I said. This isn't just her usual brand of crazy anymore. This feels different. It feels personal." It had been a long and storied conflict, our little Cold War. Dave had been my sounding board through all of it. The first salvo was fired 2 years ago, a month after Brenda was elected HOA president on a platform of restoring Crestwood's prestige, which was code for making everything look exactly the same. It started with the trash can incident. I'd rolled my bins back from the curb after pickup, but left them at the side of the garage instead of inside it. That evening, a notice appeared on my door. I'd violated Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 2. Refuse receptacles must be stored out of public view on non-collection days. The notice included a photograph, clearly taken from her living room window with a timestamp. She'd measured the distance of my cans from the curb with a laser measure. A fine of $15. Then came the wind chime conspiracy. My mom had given me a small set of bamboo wind chimes. They made a gentle, clacking sound in the breeze. A week after I hung them, another notice. This time for violating the noise ordinance, which, according to Brenda's interpretation, included ambient residential noise that could be considered a nuisance. She claimed to have measured the decibels from her porch. I took them down, not because she was right, but because I couldn't stand the thought of her sitting on her porch with a decibel meter, waiting. The final straw before today had been the unapproved shrub. I love blueberries. I decided to plant a small blueberry bush in my front flower bed. It was healthy, green, and produced delicious antioxidant-rich fruit. It was also, apparently, an abomination. I received a fine for $100 for failing to submit a foliage installation proposal and for planting a shrub not found on the Crestwood Meadows approved plant list, which consisted of 3 types of ornamental grass and a particularly boring species of boxwood. "She's a Cromwell of the cul-de-sac," Dave said after swallowing his bite. "A Puritan of the petunias. So what's her new angle on the antenna?" "She's reviewing the bylaws," I said, making air quotes. "You know what that means. She's going to invent some new, vaguely worded rule and try to bully me with it." Dave's eyes lit up with the mischievous glint I knew so well. It was the same look he got before we tried to launch a potato into orbit in high school physics class. "So," he said, leaning closer to his camera, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is Project Chimera still on standby?" A slow, evil grin spread across my face. "Oh yeah," I replied. "The foundation is cured. The servos are calibrated and weather-sealed. The control panel is just waiting for me to flip the cover. It's my big red button for the HOA apocalypse. I just need a reason. A really, really good reason." Project Chimera was our magnum opus of suburban spite. After the blueberry incident, I'd had enough. I knew Brenda's ultimate target would be my antennas, the most visible and, to her, most offensive part of my hobby. So I decided to build a deterrent. A ridiculously over-engineered, completely legal, mutually assured destruction-level deterrent. Dave, a general contractor by trade who shared my love for tech and my hatred for petty authoritarians, was my willing accomplice. Over a period of 6 months, we dug a deep, reinforced concrete foundation in my backyard, ostensibly for a new patio seating area. Buried within it was the base of a 50-foot, telescoping, commercial-grade antenna mast, powered by a silent hydraulic system. We disguised the top as a simple concrete slab, The whole setup was wired to a control panel in my garage. It was absurd. It was glorious. And it was waiting. "Well, man, don't do anything stupid," Dave said, though his grin told me he absolutely hoped I would. "But if you do, for the love of God, please record it." The call ended, and I swiveled in my chair to face the window. I could see the top of Brenda's perfectly symmetrical roof. She had no idea what was sleeping in my backyard. She thought we were playing checkers. She was about to find out I was playing chess, and my queen was a 50-foot monster of aluminum and steel. My thoughts were interrupted by a ping from my computer, an email. The subject line read, "HOA official notice. Cease and desist." I opened it. It was from the board, signed by Brenda. It was a masterpiece of pseudo-legal nonsense, citing a newly minted bylaw Article 12, Section F, Aesthetic Harmony, which prohibited any non-architectural structure extending more than 36 inches above the primary roofline. It demanded the immediate removal of my antenna within 48 hours to avoid further fines and legal action. I laughed out loud. It was utterly, laughably unenforceable, a blatant violation of federal law. But it was also a declaration of war. She had fired her shot. The 48-hour clock was ticking. Little did she know, my clock was a lot faster. On a monitor in the corner, a local news channel was tracking a major storm system barreling towards our region. It was set to slam into the nearby national forest over the weekend. My SAR pager sitting on my desk was silent for now, but I knew it was only a matter of time. I looked at the threatening letter, then at the weather map. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Brenda wasn't just picking a fight with a hobbyist anymore. She was picking a fight at the worst possible time. And I had a feeling her timing was about to get her into a whole lot more trouble than an unenforceable bylaw. The game was on. Friday night descended with a fury. The storm, which had been a polite swirl on the weather map, arrived as an uninvited, drunken guest, pounding on the doors and screaming at the windows. Rain came down in sheets, so dense it seemed to suck the very sound out of the world, replacing it with a constant deafening roar. This was the kind of weather that turned gentle hiking trails into treacherous mudslides and small creeks into raging torrents. It was the kind of weather that got people lost. At 8:17 p.m., my pager screamed to life. The piercing tone cut through the storm's racket, a digital shriek that always sent a jolt of adrenaline straight to my heart. I grabbed it, the screen glowing with the urgent message. Active SAR callout, Northridge Trail, missing hikers, all teams on standby. My training kicked in, the world narrowed. The petty drama with Brenda, the stupid violation notices, it all evaporated. There was only the mission. My role for this operation wasn't in the field. I was assigned as net control. From the relative comfort of my radio shack, I would be the central communications hub. My home station, with its stable power and superior antenna system, was far more reliable than the mobile units bouncing around in jeeps on muddy fire roads. I was the lifeline, the steady voice connecting the search teams in the woods to the incident command post, the sheriff's department, and other emergency services. My job was to make sure that no message, no matter how faint, got lost in the storm. I suited up in my SAR vest out of habit, a silent ritual to get my head in the game. I fired up the rigs, the hum of the cooling fans a familiar comfort. The main radio, a Yaesu FTM 400 XDR, was already tuned to the primary SAR repeater on Mount Ashland. WX9PPD net control standing by, I transmitted. The reply from the incident command post, set up at the trailhead, was immediate but scratchy. "Copy that, Mark. We've got a family of 3. Mom, Dad, 10-year-old son. Overdue by 4 hours. Last cell ping was near Echo Point before the storm hit full force. Alpha and Bravo teams are deploying now." "Solid copy," I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard, logging the information. "WX9PPD is online and monitoring." For the next hour, I was a conduit. Radio traffic flowed through me, a stream of tense, professional voices slicing through the storm's chaos. I relayed weather updates, tracked team positions on a digital map, and patched communications between units that couldn't hear each other directly across the rugged terrain. "Bravo team to net control," a voice crackled, faint under the static. It was Sarah, Bravo's leader, a seasoned paramedic with a voice that was always calm no matter how bad things got. We're approaching the fork at Willow Creek. Conditions are deteriorating fast. That creek is a river now. Requesting confirmation on the last known coordinates. Over. Copy, Bravo leader, I said, leaning into my microphone. Stand by for coordinates. I pulled up the data from the sheriff's department. Last ping location is confirmed at grid Foxtrot, Niner, 7-Charlie 3. I repeat, grid is Foxtrot, Niner. My words were swallowed by an electronic roar. Bazis scree pop click bazis scree. It wasn't the familiar crackle and hiss of storm static. This was something else. It was harsh, artificial, and overwhelming. A solid, impenetrable wall of noise had just slammed down across the frequency. Sarah? Base camp? I called out, cranking up the volume. Anyone read me? All I have is garbage. Only the violent, looping squeal answered. My engineer brain snapped into action, shoving aside the initial spike of panic. Okay, analyze. Don't panic. I spun the dial, jumping to the secondary repeater frequency. The noise followed me. I switched to simplex, a direct radio-to-radio channel with no repeater. The jamming was there too, even stronger. It was like a digital tidal wave, drowning every channel in the 2-meter band. My hands moved, almost on their own. I patched a cable from my receiver to my spectrum analyzer. It was a piece of gear that cost more than my first car, but it could paint a picture of the invisible world of radio waves. The screen flickered to life, and my blood ran cold. There it was. Not a glitch, not a storm anomaly. It was a massive, ugly spike on the display, a crude, powerful broadband signal broadcasting illegally across the entire frequency range. It was a brute force attack, unsophisticated but brutally effective, a digital sledgehammer. The signal strength was off the charts. Whoever was doing this, they weren't miles away. They were close. Very close. No, she wouldn't, I thought. She couldn't be that stupid, that reckless. I leaned back from my desk, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked out the window of my radio shack, through the driving rain, directly at the single-story house across the street. And I saw it, a tiny, malevolent, blinking red LED. It was on a small black box sitting on her front windowsill, nestled between two perfectly placed porcelain cats, pointed directly at my house. Pointed directly at my antenna. The pieces didn't just click into place, they slammed together with the force of a tectonic collision, the threats, the 48-hour ultimatum, the sheer, bottomless well of her vindictive pettiness. She'd gone online and bought a cheap, illegal radio jammer, the kind of thing designed to block cell phones in a theater or disable GPS trackers. She probably thought she was just silencing her annoying neighbor's ham radio hobby, a little electronic prank to teach me a lesson. She had no idea. She had no concept that she wasn't just breaking a federal law. She was actively, knowingly or not, obstructing a search for a lost family, for a 10-year-old boy, in the middle of a killer storm. She had cut the lifeline. I tried my cell phone. The call wouldn't go through. The local tower was overloaded, just as I'd feared. I was an island, cut off from my team. The only thing worse than being lost in the woods is knowing that no one can hear your rescuer's calls for help. The shock evaporated, replaced by a fury so cold and pure it felt like ice water in my veins. Plan A was to reason. Plan B was to file a complaint. Plan C was to let lawyers handle it. We were so far past those now we couldn't see them in the rearview mirror. This was no longer about bylaws or antennas. This was about 3 people on a mountain who were depending on me. Brenda wanted to take my antenna off the air. Fine. I just have to use a bigger one. There was no time to think, only to act. Every second I wasted was a second that Bravo team was walking blind, a second that family was huddled in the freezing rain, a second that Brenda's little box of malice was actively endangering lives. I bolted from my office, down the stairs, and into the garage. My SAR pack lay on the workbench, a symbol of everything that was at stake. Beside it, mounted on the wall, was a large, unassuming gray metal cabinet. It looked like a standard circuit breaker box. It wasn't. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The lock clicked open. Inside, there was no maze of wires or fuses, just a clean, simple control panel. There were a few green status LEDs, a voltage meter, and a single, glorious, oversized red button, protected by a clear plastic flip cover. Engraved on a small plaque below it were two words: System Deploy. My internal monologue was back, but now it was a battle cry. Plan A was to reason with her. Plan B was to file a complaint with the FCC. Plan C was to let the lawyers handle it. This was Plan Z. The one you build because it's awesome, and you never ever think you'll have to use it. The one you name Project Chimera, because it's a monster made of aluminum, steel, and pure, unadulterated spite. Brenda didn't just break an HOA bylaw. She broke the law of human decency. She broke the wire. Time to build a bigger wire. I flipped up the safety cover. The plastic made a satisfying clack. For a split second, I savored the moment. The culmination of months of planning, of digging trenches in the dark, of wiring relays while Dave held the flashlight. The absolute, undeniable, righteous justification. I slammed my palm down on the big red button. A deep, resonant thump echoed from the backyard, a sound so low it was felt more than heard, like the first footstep of a waking giant. On the control panel, a green light blinked to life, its label glowing, "Hydraulics engaged." I ran to the back door, flicked on the exterior floodlight, and peered out into the maelstrom. The sight that greeted me was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The section of my patio that Brenda had once complained was poured with a non-standard concrete aggregate, was hissing. 4 thick, chrome-plated hydraulic rams were emerging from hidden slots, pushing the 10 by 10-foot slab upwards with silent, relentless force. It rose smoothly, water cascading off its sides, revealing a dark, square silo beneath it. Then, from the depths of the hole, it began to rise. The first section was thick, a solid pillar of aircraft-grade aluminum. It ascended out of the ground, followed by the next, slightly smaller section, which telescoped out from within the first. With a solid, satisfying thwomp lock, the first stage was set. Then the second, thwomp lock. The third, thwomp lock. It climbed past the gutters of my house. It climbed past the peak of my roof, the very roofline Brenda held so sacred. It climbed past the top of the 60-foot oak tree my grandfather had planted. And it kept going. As the final section locked into place, an array at the top unfolded like a metallic flower blooming in a hurricane. Several smaller antennas for various bands pointed outwards, but the crown jewel was a 3-foot solid-surface satellite dish. It whirred to life, a small motor tilting and panning it, its electronic brain hunting for the comforting handshake of a geostationary satellite 0 miles away in space. The entire process, from button press to full deployment, took less than 3 minutes. It stood there, a 50-foot monument to defiance, swaying gently in the high winds it was designed to withstand. My floodlight caught its surface, making it gleam against the violent, dark sky. In the intermittent flashes of lightning, it cast a long, sharp shadow that sliced across the neighborhood, falling directly, poetically, over Brenda Miller's roof. It was beautiful. It was obscene. It was a 50-foot-tall aluminum middle finger to petty tyranny. Dave and I had over-engineered it to survive a hurricane, but I hadn't considered its psychological warfare capabilities. It didn't just clear the house, it cleared the trees. It cleared the neighborhood's collective sense of propriety. It was the kind of thing that makes people stop their cars and point. It was perfect. I sprinted back to the radio shack, my heart hammering with a wild, triumphant energy. I yanked the coaxial cable from my now useless roof antenna and plugged it into the new feed line that ran from Chimera's base. On my computer, I rerouted the system, bypassing the jammed local frequencies entirely. I was connecting my rigs to the satellite uplink, punching a signal straight through the storm and the jamming, hitting a satellite that would bounce it back down to a massive ground station 1,000 miles away. From there, the signal would travel through the internet to the SAR's own VoIP gateway, which would patch me right back into the Mount Ashland repeater from the other side, clean and clear. It was the most ridiculously complicated way to make a radio call ever devised by a suburbanite, and it was working. I put on my headset, the comforting weight settling on my ears. I keyed the microphone. SAR net control to base camp. This is WX9PPD, do you copy? My voice was steady, professional, betraying none of the manic glee I was feeling. For a second, there was only silence. Then, a voice exploded from the speaker so clear and loud it made me jump. Holy cow, Mark! You're coming in 5x9. Full quieting. Where the hell are you broadcasting from? The International Space Station. Had to reroute the signal through an auxiliary array, I said, the understatement of the century. We're back online. What is Bravo Team's status? The lifeline was restored. The connection was made. The search was back on. I began relaying the last known coordinates, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my voice calm and measured. And just as I finished my transmission, I heard it. A new sound, one that managed to cut through the roar of the storm and the hum of my equipment. It was a high-pitched, rage-fueled shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. It was coming from across the street. The Queen had just noticed the new castle that had sprung up in her kingdom. I left my station for a moment, the vital radio traffic now flowing smoothly, and walked to my front door. The cool metal of the doorknob felt grounding. I took a deep breath, grabbed the half-full mug of coffee from the kitchen counter, and opened the door. The scene was even better than I could have imagined. Brenda was standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, in the pouring rain, wearing what appeared to be silk pajamas and a flimsy raincoat. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and her face, illuminated by the flashes of lightning, was a contorted mask of pure, sputtering rage. She was pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at the sky, at my beautiful, monstrous tower. Her other hand held her phone to her ear, and she was screaming into it. Yes, a tower, a giant metal thing. It came out of the ground like a demonic mushroom. He's a nut job. He's a spy. He's probably talking to Russia. You need to send everyone. The SWAT team. The National Guard. I leaned against the doorframe, taking a calm sip of my coffee. The hot liquid was a stark contrast to the cold chaos of the night. I knew this was the inevitable next step. Phase 2. The Reckoning. In the distance, through the din of the storm, a new sound began to slice through the air, the unmistakable wail of approaching sirens. Oh, she'd gotten through to 911 all right. This was going to be fun. A few minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up, its lights painting the rain-soaked street in strobing blues and reds. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a thick mustache and the weary, stoic expression of a man who had seen every possible flavor of human absurdity and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of them. The other was young, barely out of his 20s, with the earnest, slightly overwhelmed look of a rookie on a bad-weather shift. The older one, whose name tag read Ramirez, held up a hand to calm Brenda, who had immediately descended upon them like a pterodactyl. The rookie, Gable, just stared, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes fixed on the 50-foot metal behemoth that had mysteriously sprouted in my backyard. I gave them a small, friendly wave. Ramirez's eyes met mine. He gave a slow, deliberate sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire pension, then trudged across my lawn, his partner trailing behind him. "Evening, sir," Ramirez said, his voice flat. "Mind telling me what in the Sam Hill that is?" He hooked a thumb towards the tower, not even looking at it, as if to do so would give it power. "Evening, officers," I said, stepping aside. "Why don't you come on in out of the rain? I can explain everything. Coffee's fresh." They exchanged a look. A warm, dry living room versus a screaming woman in the rain was an easy choice. They stepped inside, dripping onto my welcome mat. I led them into the living room, where I had already placed a neatly organized folder on the coffee table. Preparation is everything. Officer Gable was still craning his neck to see the tower through my front window. "Sir, your neighbor is claiming you erected an illegal spy tower." "My neighbor," I began, my tone calm and reasonable, "is mistaken, and also I believe in the process of committing several federal felonies. Please, have a seat." I walked them through it, step by step. Step 1. The justification. I opened the folder and presented my county search and rescue credentials and my official FCC amateur radio license. I am a volunteer net control operator for an active search and rescue mission, I explained. Right now, as we speak, teams are in the national forest searching for a lost family with a 10-year-old child in this storm. Ramirez's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He picked up my ID, examining it. Step 2. The crime. I led them into my Radio Shack. On the spectrum analyzer's screen, the ugly spike of the jamming signal was still present, a clear, damning piece of evidence. A few hours ago, all of our SAR communication frequencies were deliberately and maliciously jammed. This, I said, pointing to the screen, is a powerful, illegal broadband radio jammer. That signal is a violation of the Communications Act of 1934, Section 333. It is actively endangering the lives of 3 people. And based on the signal strength, I paused, then pointed out the window towards Brenda's house. The source of that illegal transmission is originating from that house right over there. Gable's eyes widened. You're saying she's doing that? Step 3. The solution. I gestured out the window at the base of the mast. That tower is an emergency satellite communications mast. When she cut off my conventional radio link, it was the only way I could re-establish contact with my team and the incident command post. It is temporarily deployed under the FCC's Emergency Communication Provisions, Part 97. It is, in effect, a life-saving device. Gable was struggling to process the information, his academy training utterly failing to provide a precedent for this. So, you're saying she's using a jammer? And you built that to get around it? Correct, I said, nodding. My communications were illegally blocked during a life or death situation. I utilized my own pre-prepared equipment to overcome the obstruction. Every component of that tower is fully compliant with FCC height and emission regulations for its class. Ramirez finally spoke, rubbing his eyes with his thumb and forefinger. He let out a long, slow sigh. Okay, let me get this straight. She got mad about your little antenna. He gestured vaguely towards my roof. So she committed a federal crime, and you retaliated by building the Eiffel Tower in your backyard? In a nutshell, yes, I confirmed with a cheerful smile. But it's a legal Eiffel Tower. As if on cue, a large, white, windowless van pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the rain. The timing was so perfect I almost wept. The side of the van had a professionally printed logo, a satellite orbiting a suburban house with the words, Suburban Satellite Solutions, connecting you to a higher plane. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Dave, dressed head to toe in a ridiculously official-looking navy blue jumpsuit with a patch on the sleeve. He even had a hard hat on. He strode towards my front door, carrying a heavy-duty Pelican case and a clipboard, looking every bit the part of a seasoned technician. Hey, Mark, he boomed, his voice loud enough for the officers and anyone within a 50-foot radius to hear. Dave from SSS. Got the alert that the emergency deployment was successful. Just here to run the post-launch diagnostic and ensure system stability. Whoa, is everything okay here, officers? He feigned surprise perfectly. I could see the last vestiges of resistance in Officer Ramirez's soul crumble into dust. He muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, oh, for the love of, they have a van. Dave, my glorious, chaos-loving friend, walked right past the shell-shocked officers, giving me a subtle wink. He went to the window, looked up at the tower, and nodded professionally. Yep, looks good. Solid deployment. No oscillation in the high winds. That foundation we poured is rock solid, rated for 120-mile-per-hour gusts. She ain't going anywhere. This masterstroke of suburban theater completely dismantled any argument Brenda could have about the tower being an unsafe, amateur structure. It was now, for all intents and purposes, a professional, emergency installation. Ramirez pinched the bridge of his nose. Okay, he said, his voice strained. Okay, we're gonna go have a word with your neighbor. Stay put. He and Gable walked back out into the rain. Dave and I watched from the doorway as they approached Brenda, who had been waiting impatiently. We couldn't hear the conversation, but we could see the pantomime. Brenda, ranting and pointing. Ramirez, standing like a rock, impassive. Gable, looking back and forth between Brenda's house and my tower, his mind visibly blown. Then, we saw Gable point directly at Brenda's front windowsill, at the little black box with the blinking red light. Brenda froze. Her tirade stopped mid-squawk. A few minutes later, Ramirez trudged back across the lawn alone. His expression was one of profound weariness. "She admits it," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "She bought a signal blocker online to stop his noisy radio." Her words. Said she thought it was like a TV remote for antennas. He let out another epic sigh, a sound that contained the weight of all human folly. "The feds are on their way. FCC enforcement. Possibly the FBI, given the SAR angle. We've secured the device as evidence." He finally looked up at the tower, truly seeing it for the first time. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mustache. "And per procedure," he continued, "since your tower is now part of an active federal investigation, you can't take it down. Not until they clear it. Have a good night, sir." He tipped his hat and walked back to his cruiser, leaving me and Dave standing in the doorway. The rain had started to let up. Dave clapped me on the shoulder. "The feds," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "You magnificent bastard, you got the feds involved." I just smiled, looking at the blinking lights on my radio console. The sweet, beautiful sound of bureaucratic, multi-agency, federal-level consequences. It was better than I could have ever imagined. She wasn't just getting an HOA fine. She was getting a visit from the people who don't fool around, the ones with their own acronyms and a distinct lack of a sense of humor about their radio spectrum. The game wasn't just over. It had been won in spectacular fashion. The world feels different after a storm. The air is clean, scrubbed raw. The sun rises with a kind of tentative hope, painting the wet streets in shades of gold and silver. As dawn broke, casting long shadows from my still erect tower, the news I had been waiting for all night finally came. The voice over the radio was tired but triumphant. It was Sarah, Bravo Team's leader. "Base Camp, this is Bravo Team. We have them. I repeat, we have visual on the missing party. All three are accounted for. They are cold, scared, but they are safe." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. This was it. This was the whole point. The petty squabbles, the ridiculous escalation, all of it faded into the background, replaced by the simple, powerful truth. A family was safe because the line had held. Because when Brenda cut the wire, we'd built a bigger one. The coordinates I'd relayed from the satellite link had guided them to the small rock outcropping where the family had taken shelter. It had worked. My moment of quiet satisfaction was interrupted by a firm knock on the front door. This wasn't the police this time. This knock had gravitas. I opened the door to two individuals, a man and a woman, dressed in nondescript slacks and official-looking navy blue windbreakers. The letters stitched in gold on the breast were stark and unambiguous. FCC enforcement. They were the men in black, but for nerds. "Mr. Porter?" the man asked. His face was all business, not a trace of humor. "That's me," I said. "We're agents from the Federal Communications Commission. We need to ask you a few questions about an incident of malicious interference last night." "Of course," I said. "Please, come in. I have a full log of the event." They spent the next hour in my radio shack. They weren't like the local cops, who were bewildered by the technology. These people understood it intimately. They examined my station, my logs, my spectrum analyzer data, and my magnificent tower with a professional, dispassionate eye. I gave them a detailed, time-stamped account of everything that had happened. When I finished, the female agent looked from my logbook to the tower outside the window. "That's one hell of a contingency plan, Mr. Porter," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I believe in being prepared," I replied. They took my statement, collected a copy of my data, and then proceeded across the street to Brenda's house. I watched from the window as they knocked on her door. The conquering empress of Crestwood Meadows looked small and defeated as she answered it. The walk of shame, when it came, was a public spectacle. A few curious neighbors had emerged, drawn by the official-looking car and my impossible tower. They stood on their porches, coffee mugs in hand, whispering amongst themselves. They watched as the FCC agents emerged from Brenda's house. They watched as Brenda was officially served with a thick packet of papers detailing her violations. Her face, even from across the street, was a pale mask of disbelief and horror. The Queen had been dethroned, not by a neighborhood vote, but by a federal agency she probably didn't even know existed 24 hours ago. The neighborhood rumor mill, already churning at light speed, went into overdrive. The legend of Mark's Tower was born. A week later, life in Crestwood Meadows had fundamentally changed. The reign of terror was over. Brenda, facing massive federal fines and the very real possibility of jail time for endangering a rescue operation, had resigned as HOA president in disgrace. I heard through the grapevine she'd put her house on the market. An emergency HOA meeting was called. I attended, reluctantly. The story was recounted, this time with the full details of the SAR operation. When the motion was made to immediately and permanently rescind the infamous Article 12, Section F bylaw about structures above the roofline, the vote was unanimous. I had become, much to my dismay, a local folk hero, the guy who fought the HOA and won with overwhelming, glorious firepower. The FCC investigation concluded by officially clearing me of any wrongdoing. In fact, I received a formal letter thanking me for my resourcefulness in maintaining vital communications during an emergency. The letter also stated that, given the circumstances, they had no objection to the tower remaining as a permanent fixture, provided it was maintained to code. It was now not just a tower, it was a federally recognized instrument of public service. Which brought me to today. I was sitting in a lawn chair in my backyard with Dave, a couple of cold beers sweating in the late afternoon sun. The massive, 50-foot tower stood silhouetted against a brilliant orange sunset. It was a permanent part of the landscape now. My landscape. "So you gonna keep it?" Dave asked, taking a long pull from his bottle. I looked up at the intricate array of antennas, the solid dish pointed at the heavens. It was absurd. It was oversized. It was a constant reminder of the single most insane week of my life. "You know," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I think it adds something to the skyline, gives the place character." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from my next-door neighbor, Jim. "Hey Mark, my kid's new drone is stuck on your satellite dish. Any chance you could lower it a bit?" I showed the text to Dave. He burst out laughing, nearly spraying beer everywhere. "What about Brenda?" Dave asked, wiping a tear from his eye. "I hear she found a buyer," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "Some guy who's really into amateur astronomy. Apparently, she told him the neighborhood has a real problem with light pollution." I paused, looking at my tower, a new source of shadows in the setting sun. I guess she's not wrong. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just two friends admiring our handiwork. The war was over. The beige had been beaten back. And Crestwood Meadows was, for the first time in a long time, interesting. I leaned back, taking it all in. The quiet hum of the neighborhood, the taste of cold beer, the sight of a 50-foot monument to freedom and spite in my own backyard. Yeah. Welcome to Crestwood Meadows. Some assembly required.